James, well, if leaks or anything to go by, we're all a bit underwhelmed with and not expecting too much from Jeremy Hunt. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that what this probably says is the election isn't going to be in May. Maybe some of us who maybe just want to put ourselves out of our misery will be disappointed there. I think it means it will go longer. I think it means that the Conservatives will be keeping their powder dry, to use a tortured metaphor this early. And I suspect there may be some kind of one last budget just before the election in which the government really says, look, here are all the things we'll definitely do if you give us another term.
Oh, if I had £1 for every time I heard that. One more fiscal event
debt, wouldn't we?
Just before the next election. Look, they keep delaying, don't they, announcing this election because they keep hoping things are going to get better and things just aren't where they want them to be. If they take that risk, they delay it for the summer, they risk more of these illegal crossings across the Channel, which really upsets people. We saw that the cut in the autumn statement to income tax didn't really move the dial in the polls. The same could happen for many cuts that we see being announced tomorrow. Every day is a gamble for this administration.
I think that's true to an extent, but again, gambles can also go right, can't they? So I think that the polls there, and you referenced a not terribly good poll for the Conservatives, I think that they won't change very much at all until and unless an election is actually called. I think when that happens, people will switch back on again. You know, this has been a long Parliament, right? I think all the way back when it was about getting Brexit done, and then we went through COVID, and we've been through all these other things since Ukraine. Goodness knows what else I've forgotten in these past couple of years.
Right. So if you were Chancellor, what would you be doing? What would you like to see in there to just zoop all of this up?
So I think I'd like to hear a lot of what has just been said there by the people out on the streets. You know, someone there talking about council tax. Well, you hate council tax so much because you pay it like you pay other bills. It doesn't come out of your pay packet the way that lots of other taxes do. And so when people say, oh, I want money being spent on services, not just on tax cuts, they don't take into account that what that will actually mean is more money in their pockets. So I think that tax cuts are, as long as you can say how they're going to be paid for, are something we should definitely be looking at, because that helps with the cost of living. It's a massive burden on people, especially for the poorest people in this country. They pay the highest in their incomes in taxes. And I think the other thing we could then do is to get the Treasury boffins to look at, instead of saying that tax cuts are going to cost money, you look and see what kind of economic activity they generate. If businesses and families and individuals are left with more money in their pockets, that really helps the economy as it helps them go as well. I'd love to see more of that.
Yeah, although all the boffins tell us that where we see these possible cuts in tax, we're just going to see rises in other places. And now we've seen a think tank, respected Institute for Fiscal Studies, saying that if they adopt this Labour policy to scrap the non-dom status in this country, you'll see a mass exodus, which I've been saying to Labour for months, of the super wealthy from this country. So they're not even able to exploit that opportunity. There's not many levers left to pull.
No, well, on that specifically, I completely agree. It's really frustrating, right? It's an easy thing to bash super rich people. And some of them that hide their money, for sure, that's terrible. But most of those people will spend money, again, in the economy that helps the economy grow.
Still pay tax on what they earn in this country.
Exactly right. And then the money they've got, they invest really well. And that's what pays for our schools and our hospital, right? As Margaret Thatcher said, pennies don't just fall from heaven, they have to be earned here on earth. But I think it's really important that instead of just trying to play this kind of accountancy, jiggery-pokery, you get the people in the Treasury to go, if we cut tax by this much, what does that money go and do? It can either be spent by the government or it can be spent by families and by businesses and by individuals. And I think that people tend to spend their money better than the government can. You've only got to look at all the waste inside government to see that.
Yeah.
But we saw, a lot of speculation yesterday about people spending money and who's going to be penalised as a result of that. So business class tickets on airplanes, for instance.
Second homeowners.
Yeah. So the idea is that, anybody with anything extra in their pockets, they're going to be hit.
Yeah, and I think that's concerning as well, but that's just a little foretaste of what I suspect will be to come if and when Labour actually get in. Right, the idea of the Conservatives doing this is to take one of Labour's only two, I think, remaining policies they've actually announced, to take that away from them. So politically it might work. But again, and it's an easy thing to bash people who take business class flights. I mean, I'd love to be able to afford a business class flight one day. I've never been on one. But the people that do that are people that bring in huge amounts of money. They're all net taxpayers. They bring their business here. And if we start penalising them and making the UK a worse place for them to live and to set their businesses and their families, they'll go somewhere else. Emmanuel Macron will go along and glad hand them, or someone in Italy will, or the Americans will, or
just like
Dubai,
we did when the French
else.
evicted them.
Right, exactly.
I just want to say the idea of a life of Ryanair or EasyJet just brings me out in a rash. I paid for business class. I deliberately pay for business class. I want business class. But I look and I think, to get somewhere like Belfast is £250 for a single ticket. So that's £500 return to do a 1-hour flight within the UK, and it's the same if you're going to Glasgow, for instance. And I don't know what they end up doing for people who work and commute like that, or people who want to visit Scotland or Ireland or
businesses who are funding the business class flights for people who are working.
I mean, you can get to America cheaper than you can get to Glasgow.
All of this feeds into this poll rating that we've seen. Terrible news for Number 10. I mean, they're used to seeing terrible polls, frankly. But then in the Lords last night, 5 amendments by the Lords to this flagship Rwanda bill, likely to be rejected, I would suggest, back in the Commons. But again, a big problem for the government, because you definitely got the sense that members of this Conservative Party, particularly on the right, held their nose and agreed to vote for that, because this is exactly as far as they were prepared to go. Any watering down, as they perceive it, from the Lords will not wash. Where does this leave the flights to Rwanda?
Yeah, I think this is the big challenge, right? When the Prime Minister laid out his 5 priorities, I won't try and list them all this early in the morning, but one of them was stop the boats. That's probably the one that most people can say. And that people will be really frustrated at the fact that, the 5th biggest economy in the world, we're a major nuclear powered military and all the rest of it, and we can't stop a couple of dinghies coming across, and it gets locked up inside the Lords, it gets locked up with lawyers and all these sorts of things. People thought, well, we voted leave, didn't we? I thought at least we'd be free of some of this stuff. I need to hear the European Convention on Human Rights come along, which was never designed to prevent a country like the UK from stopping people illegally coming into the country.
Why do we care what other countries think? Why don't we just buck all these people out? Why don't we stop them going to wherever they're going to, just throw them out to Rwanda? Who's going to do anything about it? You get them to Rwanda, it's somebody else's problem, surely. We had Priti Patel in here yesterday. He was talking quite straight about things, but totally unable to do anything. And the migration situation, we haven't even seen the worst of it, not even anywhere near the worst of it.
Yeah, I think you're about to talk about Arsenal beating Sheffield in a minute. And who sponsors them? The Visit Rwanda Tourism Board. The idea that it's not a safe country when you've got Premier League football clubs advertising people to come visit is mad. We're stuck inside the ECHR, and even though we've left, we tend to abide by these things because the British Civil Service likes to do everything by the book and it likes to gold plate things. France, still inside the European Union, it's inside the ECHR. It found a guy who was preaching hate in some mosque in the south of France, saying death to the West, France is evil, France is terrible. They get him, and 8 hours later, the guy's been deported to Tunisia because the French don't listen to this stuff and they don't care about it.
So then what happens? Somebody somewhere, some lawyers would say, oh, zut alors, you can't do this. You know, this is terrible. And then people just say, clear off. Nobody cares.
Absolutely. You say fermez la bouche once, they don't shut their mouths, and you clear them out. But the problem we've got here in the UK, I think, for a long time has been that this Rolls-Royce civil service that we always talk about is so officious and doesn't seem scared of the elected politicians. You mentioned someone like Priti Patel. Remember how difficult it was for her to get the Home Office to actually do anything. People in there whose job is meant to be dealing with terrorists and criminals and rape, and the worst people we've got inside the country, and they're not willing to do the things that need to be done to keep us safe.
Well, I suppose there would be people who'd say we have a proud history of looking out for those who are...
Yeah, but we're fed up with that.
Well,
now.
And they might
Everybody's
always
fed
point
up
to
with
the
that.
fact that there was a huge genocide in Rwanda and there's no free and fair democracy. That's the counter-argument. Listen, thank you very much. We'll have more from you a little bit later on, James. Always good to get your thoughts. James Price, former Chief of Staff.
Very interesting listening to you, James.